Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
Positronic Hypersonic.
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of The Walking Dead. Dead City, it was called Another Shitty Lesson. And as it starts, Maggie sees that the New Babylon forces are preparing the ferry Liberty Queen for transport and is visibly unhappy about it. Meanwhile, Negan sits in his cell looking at a bunch of cockroaches with the door wide open when he's visited by Victor, who had been ordered to clean up his cell. Taking a seat, Victor tells Negan that as a kid, Victor's father had forced him to learn the violin. He says that he eventually learned Bach, and with obvious passion, he plays violin Parida No. 2 in D minor for Negan. At the same time, in a command tent, Charlie Bird tells General Houseman and others, including Pearlie Armstrong and Benjamin Pierce, that the Constable Hook in Bayonne, New Jersey, will take them into the Hudson towards Manhattan, and they will dock at a pier at Hudson River Park. Lucia states that the governor's island can serve as cover in case of an engagement. Pearlie points out that it's supposed to be an exploratory mission, but Charlie simply tells him that you never know. Maggie enters and ignores Lucia's orders to return to her unit, so Pearlie decides to handle it. Outside, Maggie points out that the Croat is going to see the ferry coming from miles away, but Pearlie tells her that while the ferry isn't discreet, the bay was chosen because there's no way that the Croat can see them from Manhattan. Pearlie believes that they have the element of surprise, but Maggie points out that the Croat already knows that they're coming, thanks to Pearlie, who had told the Croat who he was and that he was from the New Babylonian frontier when he was a prisoner at the Barotse. As a result, the Croat has most likely been preparing for an invasion since the second that Pearlie escaped. Meanwhile, the Croat and Negan drive up to the King Francis Theater. Inside, the Croat tells Negan and the Demo that they just received the signal and that they can presume that the New Babylonian ship is being loaded and fueled as they speak. However, the New Babylonian forces will never reach the island now that the other gangs are united with the Barotse. The Doma warns the Croat that only one other gang have signed on with them, that they're still waiting for two other gangs to sign on. But the Croat reassures her that the gang's services aren't required yet, as the Barotse have been preparing for this very circumstance for some time now. The Croat asks the Doma what she thinks of the plan, but the Doma asks Negan in turn, accusing him of being too distracted by the thought of his family's impending arrival, which I guess she had arranged. Negan admits that he thinks it's a solid plan that will knock out the ship. However, it certainly isn't a death blow in his mind, especially since this is only the first wave of any invasion. Negan suggests cranking things up and giving a sort of 4th of July laser light style spectacular to everyone in their response, including the people on the ship, their people back home, and the people that are on the Barotse's side already. With the gangs having trouble making up their minds, he thinks this will convince them because it'll erase any lingering doubts that they have. Both the Croat and the Doma are pleased with Negan's idea, and the Croat decides that he and Negan will work together to come up with a more spectacular element to their defense. Meanwhile, Maggie discovers a pile of burning tires with a blue cloth sitting on top, having been used to ignite them. Herschel appears from behind a nearby RV and explains that the leaders back home had lent him a horse and that he tracked Maggie. Stunned at her son following her, Maggie tells Herschel that they'll hide for the night, but that he has to go back first thing in the morning. Maggie had recognized the fire as a smoke signal to the Croat, meaning that he now knows they're coming. Herschel tells his mother that they need to get Ginny and go, but they're found by New Babylonian soldiers. Lucia accuses Maggie of desertion, stating that she was being followed out of suspicion that she was intending to desert, and thinks that Herschel was waiting to help her. Pearlie interjects, saying that he had instructed Maggie to look for proof that the Croat knows they're coming. Maggie explains that they had found a smoke signal, which is the Croat's method of communication across the Hudson, meaning that the Croat has a spy who just tipped him off to their plans. Pearlie vouches for that, warning that the Croat will be ready if he knows they're coming. Maggie urges the governor to postpone and send a small group in a canoe or a raft instead of the whole ship, but Lucia is incredulous at the idea of leaving their entire army behind, insisting that they've been planning for months and that now is the time to strike. When asked for his opinion, Pearlie states that the Croat might know they're coming, but not tonight. If the army leaves right away, he says, they might be able to surprise them, and Charlie agrees with this. Maggie demands to know why she was brought along if no one's even going to listen to her, and plans to leave with Herschel and anybody else who's got their head on straight, rather than go on a suicide mission. However, Lucia warns that the law against draft evasion also applies to desertion, and threatens to hang Maggie and the 20 soldiers that she stood in for, starting with Herschel. Enraged at the threat to her son, Maggie punches Lucia in the face, and Lucia declares that insubordination is also a crime, before ordering that Maggie and Herschel be locked up in the hold. On a Manhattan rooftop, the Barotse prepare cannons while Negan puts together a small telescope. At night, the Liberty Queen makes her way across the Hudson. Pearlie enters the hold and apologizes, telling Maggie that he doesn't agree with her imprisonment at all, but that he can't override Lucia despite outranking her. Maggie urges Pearlie to get them to turn the ferry around and save the 50 innocent lives aboard that are heading straight into an ambush. Pearlie acknowledges that Maggie might be right, and that the Croat will try something, but he insists that New Babylon will fight back and win since they're bigger, better equipped, and better organized. Maggie argues that Pearlie is wrong, and that he and everyone from New Babylon have a blind spot. They're so obsessed with getting back what they lost that they'll overlook anything that gets in their way. While New Babylon underestimates her, Maggie urges Pearlie not to do the same thing with the Croat, reminding Pearlie that he knows what the Croat is capable of. Maggie asks him to let them go, but he just apologizes and leaves. Back on Manhattan, as Negan watches the Liberty Queen approach with his telescope, the Croat comments on the irony that the natural resource pulling the New Babylonians towards the island will be the agent of their demise. The ferry enters a field of buoys, and Pearlie joins Benjamin at the railing. The ferry hits one of the buoys, which explodes, damaging the Liberty Queen as the Barotse cheer from the rooftop. Pearlie realizes that the buoys are actually methane bombs designed to trigger an impact. The Barotse have created a minefield on the Hudson. Charlie orders Lucia to cut the engines and drop anchor immediately, and orders Houseman to have all units go to the secured deck below. The ferry hits another mine, and Maggie begs her guard to ignore her orders and help Maggie and Herschel escape. However, the frightened woman just runs off instead. Ginny then enters with a hacksaw and cuts Maggie and Herschel free. At the bow, Charlie supervises soldiers using fire extinguishers to put the flames out on the front end of the boat, and she radios Pearlie and Lucia, telling them that if they stay anchored, it should buy them some time. Maggie and Herschel begin untying a raft, and Herschel tells Ginny to find whoever she can and bring them for an escape. Everyone notices these objects flying through the air moments later, which turn out to be bombs fired by the Barotse. Charlie takes a direct hit and is blown to bits, while Maggie is flung into the raft by the force of the explosion. Herschel helps his mother out, and they frantically work to untie the raft before the ferry can be destroyed. On the rooftop, the Barotse release walkers one by one from a cage, put them down, and pump them up with methane before taping and gluing the walkers' mouths, noses, and eyes shut to keep the methane inside. The walkers are then loaded into the cannons and fired as walker bombs at the Liberty Queen on Negan's order. At one point, Negan has Victor wait, and once he sees that an escape raft carrying Maggie, Herschel, and Ginny is clear, he gives the order to fire again. The walker bombs destroy the Liberty Queen, killing most of the New Babylonian forces. Both the Croat and Victor notice Negan's obvious hesitation, but neither confront him about it. The raft makes it ashore with Maggie, Herschel, Ginny, Pearlie, Lucia, and 10 other survivors, and they're all that's left of the group of people that was on the boat. A herd of walkers approaches, and Lucia discovers that her gun is missing. Taking charge, Maggie tells Pearlie that there are too many walkers to fight, and she leads them in fleeing from the herd. At the church the next day, the Doma prepares a bottle of champagne to celebrate and notes that while it was their first battle, it was quite the resounding and explosive fight. Cole and another Barotse bring in a captive Benjamin Pierce who had washed up near Pier 45. Seeming to recognize the Doma, Benjamin asks if they've met before, but she very much doubts it. The Doma decides to let Benjamin visit with them for now in case she has any more questions. Before they celebrate, the Doma wants to know who Negan was trying to spare when he hesitated. Victor joins them, having been summoned by the Croat, and Negan tells the Doma to take whatever she's planning out on him, not Victor. The Doma asks about Victor's violin playing, which has been discovered because a violin was found in Victor's station outside of Negan's cell. With Negan's agreement, Victor plays the same song that he'd played for him earlier. Negan finally admits that he was stalling because there was a kid on the ferry, claiming that it was some random kid who didn't deserve to die. Cole and the other Barotse restrain Negan in his chair as the performance continues. Suddenly, the Doma stabs Victor in the side of the neck and slits his throat, killing him, as Negan yells in protest and anger. The Doma then sticks her blade in Benjamin's pocket and kisses the Croat on the head, telling them that he did a very good job. As the Doma pops the champagne, Negan glares at the Croat. The dejected New Babylonian survivors sit in an alley where Maggie removes her handcuffs. Hearing an engine nearby, Maggie recognizes it as the Barazzi and recommends to Pearlie and Lucia that they head for a nearby park, which is dense and overgrown, meaning that they can hide out there until sunset at least. Pearlie agrees, pointing out to Lucia that Maggie has been right this whole time. Maggie notices Herschel bandaging an injured woman's leg with the same blue cloth that was used to start the signal fire, and realizes that her son was the one who had sold them out to the Croat. Herschel then sits with his mother and apologizes for earlier, telling Maggie that he doesn't know what's going on with him, that he just freaked out. Herschel says he's glad that Maggie is safe and that he loves her. He embraces his mother, who returns the sentiment and silently cries, choosing not to confront her son about his betrayal. Ginny watches them and rummages through her bag where she has stored Lucia's gun, having secretly stolen it from her. Hearing the Barazzi nearby again, the surviving New Babylonian forces head into Central Park, unaware that it's now a no man's land from which no one ever comes out. And that's where the episode ended. So, as you can tell from that breakdown, there was a lot of stuff that happened in this episode. And it was all pretty good. I mean, it was kind of stunning watching the quote-unquote military of New Babylon trip all over itself trying to accomplish this mission when they should have known better, especially because Maggie was pointing out to them the flaw in their plans. So it was really just kind of amazing watching them be so stupid. And apparently it's because they're so blinded by what they're trying to accomplish that they don't want to take their time to do things right, which will probably change now. You know, the action sequences where they were hitting the bombs and then where the Barazzi were launching methane-filled walkers at them as bombs was just insane. And the same can be said of how the Doma responded to what Negan did when he hesitated, which didn't actually cost them anything. They still destroyed the ship. But, you know, for the crime of hesitation, she had to punish him and decided to do that not by taking it out on him directly, but by killing someone that she knew it would bother him to see killed, which is exactly what happened. And that's just insane. And that's because the Doma is insane. And, you know, I like the fact that Negan hesitated, that he let Herschel and Maggie escape along with Ginny. And, you know, you could argue that he did that solely because of Ginny, but I don't think that's the case. I think Negan is a changed man, and I think he's only doing the Doma's bidding because he has to. It's under duress. And so I'm glad that, you know, they're showing that he's still in there. The only sort of negative I would have about the episode is kind of the same one I had about last week, which is I don't care at all about Herschel. Like, I don't care about his involvement in this. I think the character stinks. So every minute that he's in kind of just bugs me. But, you know, I think the rest of the show is good enough, and I think it's going to get better once Maggie and Negan get together. They're separated right now, but I think once they start to interact with each other is when it's going to really get good. So hopefully that'll happen in the next week or 2 weeks, and we'll get to see that. But that's really it. So I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.